The year was 1939, a time when the world was on the brink of monumental change. The world watched in shock and horror as Germany, under the leadership of Adolf Hitler, launched an invasion of Poland. This aggressive act marked the beginning of World War II, a conflict that would become the deadliest in human history, engulfing nations and continents. The war saw the Axis powers, primarily Germany, Italy and Japan, pitted against the Allied forces, led by Great Britain, the United States and the Soviet Union. Millions of soldiers and civilians were drawn into the conflict, which raged across Europe, Asia and Africa, leaving a trail of devastation in its wake. The early years of the war were marked by Axis domination as their forces advanced rapidly. Germany swiftly conquered much of Europe, while Japan made significant territorial gains in Asia and the Pacific, expanding their empire. The Allied powers faced an uphill battle against these formidable foes, strategizing and mobilizing their resources for a long and grueling fight. The world held its breath, uncertain of the future, as news of battles and bombings reached every corner of the globe. The tide began to turn in 1941, with pivotal events such as the attack on Pearl Harbor and the German invasion of the Soviet Union. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor brought the United States into the war, significantly tipping the balance of power in favor of the Allies. Hitler's decision to invade the Soviet Union, breaking their non-aggression pact, would prove to be a costly miscalculation, altering the course of the war. The Allied forces, bolstered by American resources and manpower, began to gain ground. The arrival of fresh American troops and supplies provided a much-needed boost to the weary Allied soldiers who had been fighting in harsh conditions. In North Africa, a series of intense and grueling battles culminated in the Axis defeat in 1943. This victory was a turning point, showcasing the resilience and strategic prowess of the Allied forces. This hard-fought victory paved the way for the Allied invasion of Italy. The Allies meticulously planned their next move, knowing that Italy was a crucial stepping stone to liberating Europe. Italy, weakened and facing internal strife, surrendered to the Allies later that year. The Italian people, exhausted by years of war, welcomed the Allied troops as liberators, hoping for a swift end to the conflict. However, German forces continued to resist fiercely, resulting in a bloody and protracted campaign up the Italian peninsula. The rugged terrain and fortified positions made every advance costly and slow. While the fighting in Italy raged on, the Allies were simultaneously planning a massive invasion of Nazi-occupied France. This operation required unprecedented coordination and resources. This operation, codenamed Overlord, would become known as D-Day. It was a bold and risky endeavor involving thousands of ships, aircraft and soldiers. It was a daring gamble, a massive logistical and military undertaking that would decide the fate of Europe. The success of D-Day marked the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany, leading to the eventual victory in Europe. On June 6, 1944, Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy, France. Under intense enemy fire, American, British and Canadian troops fought their way ashore. It was a day of immense courage, sacrifice and bloodshed. Despite heavy casualties, the Allies established a foothold in France. The D-Day landings marked a turning point in the war. The liberation of France had begun. Allied forces pushed eastward, liberating Paris and driving the Germans back towards their own borders. While D-Day unfolded in the West, the Eastern Front witnessed some of the war's most brutal fighting. The Soviet Union, after enduring the initial shock of the German invasion, had been steadily pushing back. The Battle of Stalingrad, a grueling, months-long siege, marked a turning point in the East. The German defeat at Stalingrad was a crushing blow to their war effort. The Red Army, fueled by a fervent defense of their homeland, continued to advance westward. They liberated Eastern European countries from Nazi control, exacting a heavy toll on the retreating German forces. Section 5. Germany's surrender. The war in Europe ends. By early 1945, Germany was on the verge of collapse. Allied forces were closing in from the west, while the Soviets advanced from the east. Berlin, the heart of the Nazi regime, was under siege. On April 30th, 1945, Adolf Hitler committed suicide in his underground bunker. Germany's unconditional surrender followed soon after. The war in Europe was over. Victory in Europe, or VE Day, brought immense relief and jubilation to the Allied nations. However, the fight was not over. The war in the Pacific raged on. Section 6. The Pacific Theater Island Hopping and Atomic Bombs. In the Pacific, the United States had been engaged in a brutal island hopping campaign against Japan. Battles like Iwo Jima and Okinawa were costly and fiercely contested. Japanese soldiers fought with unwavering tenacity, often to the death. The United States, determined to end the war swiftly and avoid further casualties, made the fateful decision to use atomic bombs. On August 6, 1945, an American B-29 bomber dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima, Japan. The city was instantly devastated. 3 days later, a second atomic bomb was dropped on Nagasaki. The devastation caused by these weapons was unprecedented. Section 7. Japan's surrender, the end of World War II. Faced with unimaginable destruction and the threat of further atomic attacks, Japan announced its surrender on August 15, 1945. The formal surrender ceremony took place on September 2, 1945, aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay. World War II, the deadliest conflict in human history, was finally over. The world celebrated the end of the war, but the cost of victory was staggering. Millions lay dead, cities were in ruins, and the global landscape was forever changed. Section 8. A world reshaped, the legacy of the war. The aftermath of World War II left an indelible mark on the world, altering the course of history forever. The war had profound political, economic, and social consequences that reshaped nations and societies. The United States and the Soviet Union emerged as superpowers, dominating global politics. But their rivalry soon led to the Cold War, a period of intense geopolitical tension. The horrors of the Holocaust led to the creation of the United Nations, an organization aimed at preventing such atrocities, and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which set a global standard for human dignity. The world had learned a terrible lesson about the costs of unchecked aggression and intolerance, vowing never to repeat such mistakes. World War II was a defining moment in human history, a conflict that changed everything. It was a conflict that tested the limits of human endurance and resilience, pushing humanity to its breaking point. The war's legacy continues to shape the world we live in today, influencing international relations and global policies.